Today, I feel quite humbled to talk to you about a book I wrote called Replicable Leadership. When I run my own company, I always use the leadership methods described in this book. So, I think it is a knowledge that can create value for others. What is replicable leadership? In my classes, I often ask my students, do you think leadership can be learned by taking this course? They usually say no, claiming it takes over a decade of experience to develop some leadership skills. I then ask, if you know you can't learn it here, why take this course? Isn't it a waste of time? In fact, leadership can absolutely be learned by taking this course. I know that many people start shaking their heads when they hear this. I often ask, do you know what Confucius's biggest weakness was? While everyone knows that I admire Confucius and speak extensively about his teachings, it's also important to acknowledge that Confucius also had his weaknesses. So, what is Confucius's weakness? They say that he was conservative, resistant to change, and overly doctrinal. None of these criticisms are accurate. They do not understand Confucius. Confucius's biggest weakness was that he did not know how to train ordinary people. He only knew how to cultivate the brilliant ones. How many disciples did he have? We often say Confucius had 3,000 disciples, with 72 proficient in the 6 arts. What does this mean? It means that he had 3,000 students, but only 72 graduated. Among these, only 22 had their names mentioned in the Analects. Finally, only 10 of them, known as the 10 philosophers, were venerated in the temple alongside Confucius. Therefore, with 70 graduates among 3,000 students, his success rate wasn't really that high. During the times of Plato and Socrates, what did they teach? The most famous is the syllogism, major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. Someone once asked Plato, what is a human? Plato responded, a human is a featherless biped. If you want a definition, I'll give you a definition. The student went home and felt something was wrong in the words of Plato, so he found a chicken and plucked all the feathers off it. The next day, he took the bald chicken to see Plato and said, teacher, look, this is a human, a featherless biped. Obviously, this definition was wrong, but what are they playing with? They are playing with logic, major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. This is a particularly interesting phenomenon I discovered in my interactions with many Fortune 500 companies. For example, when it comes to leadership, many of us in China might see leadership as something mysterious. Leadership is a kind of charisma, something developed over many years. Think about how many years it took you to have the leadership you have today. If I ask you to transfer your leadership skills to your young employees, how many more years will it take you? Therefore, imagine a vice president in your company who has worked with you for 10 years, suddenly leaving for another job. How infuriating will you be? You will feel that this person has no loyalty. You might even have considered him a family member, ready to marry your daughter to him, and yet he left. Many companies have been disrupted by these seemingly disloyal individuals. It's similar to Confucius, who devoted his life to nurturing Yan Hui, only for Yan Hui to pass away even before Confucius, which he lamented as an unfortunate short life. Confucius was heartbroken, lamenting, God has forsaken me, God has forsaken me, as if his legacy was doomed. This is similar to how we feel when a trusted vice president is poached by another company. It feels like everything is falling apart. However, look at big companies like Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, IBM, and Coca-Cola. Their staff turnover is much higher than that of our private companies. Yet have you ever noticed their entire business collapsing because a vice president left? Or their Beijing operations failing because they changed the regional manager? No. Why is that? Procter & Gamble recruits through campus placements, hiring fresh graduates straight out of university. These young recruits will undergo intensive onboarding training for 2 to 3 months after entering Procter & Gamble. After this training, they are ready to start working effectively. This is why headhunters love to poach employees from these companies. Anyone who has worked in such a company for 2 or 3 years is immediately valuable. Why do these companies have such a system in place? The reason is that they have broken down all the management tools needed at work into clear, step-by-step processes. This is why I named this book Replicable Leadership. It's not sophisticated at all. It's definitely not something that only the boss can learn. Once you learn it, you can immediately teach it to everyone around you, and everyone can possess leadership skills. Let me give you an example so that you can understand it deeply. Once I attended a lecture by Mr. Baozhang. He mentioned that when Japanese managers assign work to their employees, they repeat the instructions at least 5 times. As we all know, most of the Japanese management practices stem from Western ideas, particularly from the thoughts of American W. Edwards Deming. How do they repeat it 5 times? Let me show you. The first time the manager says, Watanabe-kun, Can you please help me with this task? After the first time, Watanabe-kun says yes and turns to leave. The manager then says, wait a minute, come back and repeat what I just told you. That's the second time. Watanabe repeats the task, then asks, can I go now? The manager says, not yet. Let me ask you, what do you think is the purpose of this task? Watanabe responds, I think the purpose of this task is to ensure the smooth recording of this book. That's the third time. Can I go now? Not yet. Let me ask you, what unexpected situations might arise while doing this task? In what situations should you report to me? And in what situations can you make decisions on your own? Watanabe replies, there are a few scenarios. If this happens, I'll report to you. If that happens, I'll decide on my own. Is that okay? This is the fourth time. For the fifth time, the manager asks, finally, if you were to do this task yourself, do you have any better ideas or suggestions? Watanabe might respond, if it were up to me, I would handle it this way. Is that acceptable? After going through this process 5 times, Watanabe might say, boss, if you don't let me go now, I'll have to resign. I can't take it anymore. The manager then says, go ahead. At this point, let me ask you, is there a high chance that the task Watanabe completes will meet your expectations? In my classes, I see many students nodding in agreement, recognizing that this approach is indeed more effective. We usually criticize employees for their lack of execution skills. How do we usually scold them? Did I ask you to do this? The employee says, I thought you meant for me to do this. The employee completely misunderstood the task. Or we say, I assigned you a task, and it's been 3 days without any update. Where have you been? The employee might reply, I completed it. You didn't say I had to update you in 3 days. The funniest scenario is when an employee comes to me and asks, Mr. Fan, how should I handle this? I respond impatiently, why do you ask me about everything? What are you here for if you keep bothering me with questions? The employee learns and says, Mr. Fan has a bad temper, better not to ask. So they handle things on their own. When you come to check, you say, did you ask me about this? You're quite bold to make decisions on your own. Have you noticed that no matter what the employees do, it's always wrong? You think your employees lack execution skills? Why is that? We hope for telepathy, that a single look can solve problems. But let me tell you, it is very difficult to cultivate a person who can solve problems with just one look. You and your spouse can't even understand each other with just one look, yet you expect your employees to do so. Therefore, the execution of employees is equal to the leadership skills of the leader. This is a very important concept in our course. Execution is a false concept. Many people give lectures on execution and sell books about it because they know bosses want their employees to have strong execution skills. However, there is no truly effective execution course. The real execution comes from the improvement of the boss's own leadership skills. Even if you learn nothing else from this course, but you learn to assign tasks by saying it 5 times, I guarantee your company's efficiency will improve significantly. Why? One of the biggest costs in a company is rework. Many tasks are redone repeatedly, completed incorrectly and then redone. Filling a hole, then digging it up again and filling it once more, the cost of rework is substantial. So, we have made it clear on this point, and we know that leadership can be replicated and instrumentalized.